Thanks, guys. When I was in high school, I think I might have been a junior, maybe even a senior in high school, my youth pastor invited me to join him on a boat ride on his catamaran. I had never been on a catamaran before, and Dan picked me up and took me down to the Long Beach Harbor there in Southern California. And he taught me a few things about his small catamaran. There was two holes that were on, go onto the water, and then there was this canvas top on top of it, and then there was two sails. There was the larger sail in the back, the main sail that got the majority of the wind, and then there was the jib sail, the small sail in the front, and that helped with some wind, but also more so helped with steering. And then he said, well, as we go, you'll learn more. And we got into the water, and we got out of the Long Beach Harbor out into the ocean, and the winds were just perfect. And Dan said, hey, come join me on the edge over here and hold on and lean back. And we both leaned back, and all of a sudden the boat went up on just one hole, and he called it flying. Dan called it flying. And we flew on one hole all the way from just when we got out into the ocean, all the way out to one of those oil rigs way out there. Dan said it was the farthest he had ever flown at one time without going down in his entire sailing life. So that was pretty cool to be a part of that with him. And then we got both holes in the water, and we went south, and we went down to Balboa. And we went there into the harbor of Balboa, and we had brought some things to eat. And so we ate that, and then we went back out to sea to go back to Long Beach Harbor. But even in that little bit of time that we were in the Balboa Harbor, conditions had changed. All of a sudden, it was quite choppy and windy, and I would say even more than choppy, because all of a sudden some waves started to actually hit us and soak Dan and I as we were sailing along there. Now, remember, we're low to the ground, we're low to the water, we're in a catamaran. It's not like the Titanic, okay? These are not like massive waves. But pretty soon, we were both completely wet, and then a bigger wave hit and hit the jib sail in the front and broke it. Dan said that was not a good thing. And his job was then to navigate us through choppy waters with only one sail and to get us to where we needed to go. My job in the front was to shiver and to pray, and I sang some hymns along the way. And eventually, we got pretty close to Long Beach Harbor. I never feared of death because I could see the shore. And I was a pretty decent swimmer, and I think Dan was too. So it wasn't that kind of a fear, but still certainly uncomfortable. I wasn't enjoying the circumstance. It was taking us far longer than it should have to get back to the Long Beach Harbor because of only having one sail and because of the conditions. And finally, we made our way into the Long Beach Harbor, and we got in there a little ways, and it was completely still. I mean, like, no wind, glassy water, and guess what? With only one sail, we began to slowly drift back out to the ocean. Dan said that was not good. And the Coast Guard saw us and came and rescued us in the catamaran. I have been rescued by the Coast Guard. It was a mighty rescue. You might have seen it that night on the local news. They did something very valiant. They stuck out a long pole, and they had us hold on to it, and they towed us in to where we needed to go. This is long before cell phones, and so my parents were worried about me because I was hours and hours past what we're supposed to get home. But got home eventually, safely, drifting, slowly, drifting. Why is it spiritually that so many people who at one time in their life sought after God, and they sought after Him with all of their heart, and they found Him, because God doesn't play hide and seek, He plays seek and you will find. And then after they found Him to be a loving God and a caring God, a God who protects them and provides for them. a God who guides them, a God who forgives them of their sin and provides for them eternal life. And when they find him and they learn this about him, they fall in love with him. And when they fall in love with him, they trust him. And when they trust him, they then obey him. And when they obey him, they're willing to be courageous for him. Why is it that even people in that frame of heart and mind can begin to slowly drift away from God? Maybe if truth be told, that's true of you right now. Maybe nobody else can tell, but you know. You know what's in your heart. You know where your passions lie. You know if you're in a dry season or even in a disobedient season. You know if you've been drifting away, or maybe this message will wake you up and say, well, I didn't even realize how far I had gone. I want us to take our Bibles and turn them to the Old Testament book of 2 Chronicles to chapter 18. Last night we were in chapter 17. Tonight we're in chapter 18 as we're looking at the life of King Jehoshaphat. We looked at verses 1 through 6 in chapter 17, and we looked at this overall description of Jehoshaphat's leadership as king of Judah, that he was seeking God, obeying God, courageous for God. And if we were to read the rest of chapter 17, we would find out that Jehoshaphat appoints teachers to go about the country to teach God's word, because the people were basically biblically illiterate, like so many people today. It was a discipleship program. We find in verses 10 through 19 of chapter 17 that Jehoshaphat focuses on building up military strength in Judah, that southern portion of the kingdom. Remember, Judah and Benjamin, those two tribes make up the nation, if you will, of Judah, and then the 10 tribes of the north are the nation of Israel that is often and almost always turned against the ways of God. Judah sometimes against the ways of God. But he builds up military strength in Judah. He fortifies the cities to protect from enemy attack in Judah. He stores mass amount of supplies there in these cities. He trains many to become mighty men of valor, it says. And Judah becomes a military stronghold and gets the attention of the enemies around it. It says the fear of the Lord fell upon the enemy nations, and there was a period of peace in Judah because of the work that they had done. Enemies began to bring Jehoshaphat lavish gifts, it says, silver and rams and goats, not because they like him, but because they're afraid of him. And all is well, and the people are being discipled, and God is blessing Jehoshaphat. Enemy nations are afraid of him, and they're kissing up to him, and he's all set. Caution, warning, when you're all set and things are going really well, is when you become a target. Warning, caution, when things are all set and you're doing really well, that's when you begin to hear the accolades about your leadership or about whatever that you do, and you begin to believe your own press clippings and start to think that maybe you're the reason that these good things have happened instead of God's the reason. It can happen to the best of them. Surprisingly, almost shockingly, Jehoshaphat does something that makes no sense. It's like he loses his mind. You ever been there? One day you wake up and you go, what was I thinking? He's successful. He's blessed by God. He's teaching people God's word. He's rich. He's protected. He's safe. And then drift slowly happens. Drift slowly happens slowly. Sometimes even the most sincere of people wake up and ask themselves, how in the world did I get here? How did my marriage get here? what caused this? It was so vibrant at one time. How did I get into this life of addiction? What happened to me along the way? How did I let this idol, placing something in God's place, start to take over my life? How did I stop to have a passion after God like I used to have, etc.? And so tonight we're going to look at 3 causes of drift. There's a lot more causes of drift, but these come out of this passage, and I think they're so applicable to, I would say, all of us if we're followers of Christ. Cause of drift number 1 is drift happens when you attach yourself to ungodly people. Drift happens when you attach yourself to ungodly people. Chapter 18, look at verse 1. Now Jehoshaphat had great riches and honor, and he made a marriage alliance with Ahab. After some years, he went down to Ahab in Samaria, and Ahab killed an abundance of sheep and oxen for him and for the people who were with him, and induced him to go up against Ramoth-Gilead, which is a city to the north. So he has a big party for him, tells him how wonderful he is and for his entourage. And verse 3, Ahab, king of Israel, said to Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, will you go with me to Ramoth-Gilead? And Jehoshaphat answered him, I am as you are, my people as your people. We will be with you in the war. So Ahab gets cozy with Jehoshaphat and tells him how great he is. He throws a big party for him in order to get him to help him in battle with the Syrians because he's got all this military strength in Judah. Okay, so who's Ahab? Who's this guy? He's the king of the northern kingdom. He's the king of Israel, the 10 tribes. Jehoshaphat's the king of Judah, the southern 2 tribes. And to help you to understand who Ahab is, he is the son of Omri. How's that? Does that help? Who is Omri? Well, in 1 Kings chapter 16, 25, this sums up Omri's leadership as the king over Israel. Omri did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and did more evil than all who were before him. So he was the goat, the greatest of all time when it came to evil as the king of Israel. That's Ahab's dad. Ahab reigned for 22 years over Israel. He's the guy who went up against the prophet Elijah at Mount Carmel. Remember that story? He was married to a woman named Jezebel, the woman that Elijah ran for his life from. He, get this, served Baal, worshiped Baal, and erected an altar for Baal in Israel. That's God's country. That's Ahab. And then a description of his life and leadership in 1 Kings 16:33 says this. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger, get this, than all the kings of Israel who were before him. So he beat out his dad. Now he's the goat. Get this. He did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings. And Jehoshaphat is going to go into alliances with this guy. And you go, what? It tells us in these first 3 verses that he goes into a marriage alliance and to a military alliance. You say, what's a marriage alliance? A marriage alliance it's really a political alliance is what it is. One nation's sons and daughters are able to marry the other nation's sons and daughters. It's really more than anything between the royal family, particularly to show that they are in good standing with one another. It's for the purpose of protection, for the purpose of trading rights, for economic gain. It has zero to do with love. In this case, it's Jews marrying Jews, so that fits with their culture. So let's do this practically. So let's just use Jehoshaphat and Ahab. Let's just say Jehoshaphat has a son, and Ahab has a daughter, and they get married. And then, let's say they live in Israel, and they have babies. Jehoshaphat's going to think twice, if not 3 times, before going in there to invade because his grandkids are there. It's protection. So there's this marriage alliance, and there's a military alliance as well. So how does this marriage alliance play out down the road? So that scenario I just gave to you about Jehoshaphat's son marrying Ahab's daughter is exactly what happened. And we learn in 2 Chronicles 21, which we won't get to this week, but let me tell you what happened here. Jehoram becomes the next king of Judah. He takes over for his dad, Jehoshaphat. And it says this in 2 Chronicles 21. And he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, Jehoram did, in the ways of the kings of Israel, not Judah, interestingly enough, although his dad was the king of Judah, as the house of Ahab had done. He's under the house of Ahab in this description. Why? For the daughter of Ahab was his wife. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And she influenced him. This is Jezebel's daughter. She influenced him away from the ways of God. It backfires in a big way, this alliance. Side note, parenthesis, for those of you that are not married and want to get married, do not compromise on your choice of who you're going to marry. I don't care how good looking they are, how funny they are, how rich they are, how creative they are, how desperate you are. Don't do it. You will be sorry for the rest of your life. Say, I can, they'll come around in time. Once, I marry the guy, he's going to be fine. I could tell you story after story after story after story where it's not fine. God can still work, but don't compromise. Be careful who you marry. Additionally, for all of us, be careful who you work for, or be careful who you hang out with, right? We tell our kids, be careful who you become as your close friends, because you become like your friends. Drift happens when you attach yourself to ungodly people. Careful. This is not saying to not befriend ungodly people, or to be kind to ungodly people, or to have involvement with ungodly people, because then you have to say that Jesus' life was off kilter. In fact, Jesus was accused by the religious leaders of hanging out with sinners. And Jesus legitimately loved the sinners. He just didn't participate in their sin. He was also God. That was helpful. He didn't attach himself to their thinking and their ways, although he genuinely loved them individually. This is talking about becoming one with, joining at the heart and the hip with. No, so why would Jehoshaphat do this? Why would he join with Ahab? And I actually think there were some good intentions behind it. Verse 3, Jehoshaphat said to Ahab, I am as you are. I'm a king, you're a king. My people as your people. We're all Jews. We were all part of the same nation at one time. We will be with you in the war. Hey, we're Jews together. We're going to fight the enemy, the Syrians. We're going to go after them together. I think there's good intentions behind this. It seems that way. But sometimes good intentions bring us to bad places. The problem is that although Jehoshaphat's people are Jews and Ahab's people are Jews, Jehoshaphat's people are not like Ahab's people. Ahab and the people of Israel have drifted far away from God and serve Baal, not the true God. So we're going to get to this tomorrow night, but we're going to see here tonight about a battle that goes on and this military alliance that Jehoshaphat has with Ahab and how it ends up. And then Jehoshaphat gets saved and he comes back to Jerusalem, and right away he is confronted by Jehu, who is a seer or a prophet. And in chapter 19, verse 2, it says, "But Jehu, the son of Hanani, the seer, went out to meet Jehoshaphat and said to King Jehoshaphat, 'Should you help the wicked and love those who hate the Lord?'" That was the accusation. You love the wicked and you love those who hate the Lord. He says, don't join with them in these ways, or you're going to drift away from God. The Apostle Paul wrote this, very strong words, and I'm using the New Living Translation, 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 14 through 16. He says, "Don't team up with those who are unbelievers." Don't team up. How can righteousness be a partner with wickedness? How can light live with darkness? What harmony can there be between Christ and the devil? How can a believer be a partner with an unbeliever? And what union can there be between God's temple and idols? For we are the temple of the living God. We're the temple of the living God. How could we partner with those who are against God and try to be of one heart with them? So we drift from God and his ways when we attach ourselves to those who are far from God and his ways. Cause of drift number 2. Drift happens when you become a people pleaser. Drift happens when you become a people pleaser. And let me go on record to say that I like to please people. I do. I remember once hearing a statistic that said that 80% of people in ministry are people pleasers by nature. I don't know if that's true. 87.4 of all statistics are made up on the spot. But I like it when people like me. I like it when people admire me. I like it when people think highly of me. I've made decisions to please people, sometimes against my better judgment, because I want them to like me. I'm not talking about being kind to people and doing good things for them. I'm talking about saying yes to something that you should say no to, but you say yes to that because you want to make somebody happy and you know deep down that it's not the right thing to do. You're more about pleasing the people than you are about pleasing the Lord. And that's a dangerous place to get to as a leader. And when you get there as a leader, you start to drift away from pleasing God because you're more focused on pleasing people. I think it comes, I'm thinking of my own life, probably from insecurities. I want people to like me. I don't want to go through the criticisms that I'm going to face if I say no, or not now, or never. A quote that has been helpful to me in leadership is this: "No is a complete sentence." Write that one down. Write that down for parenting. No is a complete sentence. You don't have to say anything more. No. But too often I've said yes because I just don't want to face what's on the other side of the no. And I've almost always regretted it. And now someone comes onto the scene who has become one of my heroes in the Bible, and my guess, like maybe Jehoshaphat, maybe even more so than him, that most of you have never heard of him. You don't have to show hands, but yeah, let's do that. How many of you have heard, be honest, have heard of a guy named Micaiah? Okay. All right. That's not bad. 6%? That's actually pretty good. Micaiah is not a people pleaser and is in direct contrast to Jehoshaphat. I'm going to be reading a little bit here. Verse 4, hang in there with me. It's pretty incredible. "And Jehoshaphat," verse 4, "said to the king of Israel, 'Inquire first for the word of the Lord.'" So before we go into battle against the Syrians, would you first ask God if this is okay? He's asking Ahab that. Something's wrong with that, right? "Then the king of Israel, Ahab, gathered the prophets together, 400 men. 400 prophets. Think of that. That's a lot of people. And said to them, shall we go against Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain? And they said, go up, for God will give it into the hand of the king. 400 said that. But Jehoshaphat said, is there not here another prophet of the Lord of whom we may inquire? Okay, let that soak in for a second. 400 said, yeah, let's go do it. And he says, is there anybody else? There's a check in his spirit somehow about this. Verse 7, and the king of Israel, Ahab, said to Jehoshaphat, there is yet one man by whom we may inquire of the Lord, Micaiah, the son of Imlah. Get this. But I hate him, for he never prophesies good concerning me, but always evil. I purposely don't have him here at this party, because he's always a contrary voice. And Jehoshaphat said, let not the king say so, like, oh my. Then the king of Israel, Ahab, summoned an officer and said, bring quickly Micaiah, the son of Imlah. Because Ahab needs to have Judah's strength, he thinks, to be able to defeat the enemy. So he's going to do whatever it takes. Verse 9. Now the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, were sitting on their thrones, arrayed in their robes. So it's all this, political gallantry and all that. And they were sitting at the threshing floor at the entrance of the gate of Samaria. And all the prophets were prophesying before them. So it's a big show. And Zedekiah, the son of Chenaanah, made for himself horns of iron and said, thus says the Lord, with these you shall push the Syrians out to be destroyed. And all the prophets prophesied so and said, go up to Ramoth Gilead and triumph. The Lord will give it into the hand of the king. So he gets all frenzied up. And the messenger who went to summon Micaiah said to him, behold, the words of the prophets with one accord are favorable to the king. Let your word be like the word of one of them and speak favorably. Here, you're going to come into the setting. 400 have said yes. You're going to say the same thing. But Micaiah said, verse 13, as the Lord lives, what my God says, that I will speak. Now that's a dude. I don't care how many people have said it one way. I'm going to say what God tells me to say, period. Verse 14, and when he had come to the king said to him, Micaiah, shall we go to Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall I refrain? This is fascinating. And Micaiah answered, go up and triumph. They will be given into your hand. Say, 401, they all agree. But he must have said it snarky. He must have said it in a way that just, Ahab could figure it out. Because look at this, verse 15, but the king said to him, how many times shall I make you swear that you speak to me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord? And Micaiah said, I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains, as sheep that have no shepherd. And the Lord said, these have no master. Let each return to his home in peace. Translation, God gave me a vision, and your army is going to be all scattered, and you're going to be dead. That's the word of the Lord. Verse 17, and the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, did I not tell you that he would not prophesy good concerning me, but evil? Did I not tell you? 400 prophets' voices against one antagonist. Who's right? Who should you believe? This isn't just, a majority. This is uniformity, 400 altogether. What kind of guts would you have to say, no, they're all wrong? Micaiah has an audience of one. He cares more about what God thinks than what other people think. But Micaiah said, as the Lord lives, what my God says, that I will speak. The Apostle Paul said something like this in Galatians chapter 1. He said, as we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed. For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. You see, we drift when we start to try and please people instead of just trying to please an audience of one. Gary Gadini is on our trustees here at Mount Hermon. He comes and speaks here on a regular basis. And he said a few years back, and I took this note when he spoke, he said, instead of fearing God and persuading people, we fear people and try to persuade God. You ever tried to persuade God so you can line up with the people? Trying to please people will cause us to drift away from God. Okay, we can't leave this section without doing a little theology. Are you ready for that? Okay, that's what I thought. But this is fascinating. Look at verse 18. I mean, I'm telling you, like, you're going to go, what? Verse 18. And Micaiah said, so now he's going to tell Ahab this vision that he saw from God. And Micaiah said, therefore, hear the word of the Lord. Not my word, the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne. He saw God in heaven. And all the host of heaven standing on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab, the king of Israel, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said one thing, and another said another. And the Spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, I will entice him. And the Lord said to him, by what means? And he said, I will go out and will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. All his prophets. And he said, you are to entice him, and you shall succeed. Go out and do so. Now therefore, behold, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of these your prophets. The Lord has declared disaster concerning you. What? Did you catch this? God calls a strategy session in heaven. Here's what I have trouble with. I'm still figuring it all out, and when I figure it all out, you'll be long gone. I won't be able to tell you. But almighty, omnipotent, all-knowing God brings his folks together, the heavenly hosts, and says, come with me with different strategies, and I'll pick one to go against Ahab. And he listens to different options, and then he chooses one. I like that one. And that's what happens. Here's the reality. God sets up Ahab to fail, and he uses one of his guys to infiltrate the very thoughts and minds of 400 spiritual prophets to guide them to think what he wants them to think, to lead them astray, and to do them harm. Why would God do this? His people have drifted far from him. And since they won't return to him, he's going to bring them back to him if they would wake up by causing some stress in their life and difficulty in their life and some pain in their life. Wake up, folks. You've drifted so far away. Are there other places in Scripture where we see something like this? I want you to filter these verses with the lens of our culture and why so many think and act the way they do today. Psalm 81, verses 11 through 13. But my people did not listen to my voice. Israel would not submit to me, so I gave them over to their stubborn hearts to follow their own counsels. Oh, that my people would listen to me, that Israel would walk in my ways. The Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1 said, for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened, and claiming to be wise, they became fools. And a few verses later, verse 28, and since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Apostle Paul writes, therefore God sends them a strong delusion so that they may believe what is false, in order that all may be condemned who did not believe the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. when you walk away from God, when you do not seek after God, you will not find him. You will not fall in love with him. You will not trust him. You will not obey him. You will drift far away from him. And he will allow you to then have the consequences that go there. But sometimes he'll try to wake you up, get you back on track. And we find in this story that Ahab instructs that Micaiah gets put into prison and gets meager rations. Ahab tells him that he'll deal with him further when he gets back from the battle. And Micaiah tells Ahab that if he comes back from the battle, then obviously he didn't hear from the Lord. When you speak up for God, when you are courageous for him, important note, don't expect it to always go well for you. Maybe you'll end up in prison, or rejected, or fired, or worse. People pleasers want the reward on earth. God pleasers realize that their full reward is in heaven. Boy, that's easy to talk about. It's harder to live. Drift happens when you attach yourself to ungodly people, when you become a people pleaser. And third, drift happens when you don't protect yourself from the enemy's attacks. When you don't protect yourself from the enemy's attacks. Because when we drift away from the ways of God, we put ourselves in danger. Especially if we're hanging out with people that are opposed to the things of God. There are consequences to sin that do harm to us. That's why God has us to go down his path and his way to protect us and provide for us a healthy and good life. Sometimes we live as if there isn't even an enemy. We think that's not even real. I mean, we read about it, but deep down we don't really live in such a way that we believe that there's an enemy and we become vulnerable. And God still might protect us when we drifted. Thankfully, he often sees the good in our heart, and he still will come and protect us, but we're so vulnerable when we start to drift away from him. Look at verse 28. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, went up to Ramoth Gilead. After all of this, for some reason, Jehoshaphat still goes into battle. And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself and go into battle, but you wear your robes. Do you think Micaiah got to him? Hey, you're going to die tonight. So he's going, I'm going to go camouflage. Why don't you wear the big king robe thing? And Jehoshaphat does it. And the king of Israel, Ahab, disguised himself, and they went into battle. Now the king of Syria had commanded the captains of his chariots, fight with neither small nor great, but only with the king of Israel. Go after the king. If you go attack the king, if you get rid of the king, you're going to disrupt everything. Which is how Satan works all the time, right? Go after the leader, get the leader down. And as soon as the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, they said, it is the king of Israel. So they turned to fight against him, and Jehoshaphat cried out, and the Lord helped him, and God drew them away from him. For as soon as the captains of the chariots saw that it was not the king of Israel, they turned back from pursuing him. Now think of this scenario. Ahab's in the middle of a battlefield that he shouldn't have been in. And now he becomes the target because he's in the royal robes. In the middle of the battlefield, you can't miss him. Ahab's off looking like a foot soldier. Jehoshaphat has no one to blame but himself, and he must have asked himself the question that all who have ever drifted have asked, how in the world did I get here? How did I get here? This isn't who I really am. This isn't who I want to be. How did I get here? And he's vulnerable now, and he's in great danger. So what does he do? He cries out to God for help. Good thing to do. 2 Chronicles 18:31. So they turned to fight against him, and Jehoshaphat cried out, and the Lord helped him. God drew them away from him. God saved him. Why would he do that? Jehoshaphat's a good man. Jehoshaphat's a godly man. Jehoshaphat's lost his head a little bit, like we all have done. We have all done that if we're followers of Christ. But he still has a plan for him, and he still wants to use him. He doesn't just stick him away. And he prays this prayer, help, help, Lord. Years ago, I was part of a group that was hovering and praying over a particular individual who was going through a really scary time. And we were praying, and we had hands on this person, and so many of us, there was a guy who had his hand on my back, and et cetera, all around, and there had been a pause in the time of prayer, and all of a sudden, right behind me, the guy who was right behind me, he prayed this prayer. And this was his prayer. Help, Jesus! Scared the living daylights out of me. I've heard thousands of prayers in my life, thousands of prayers. It's the only one I can remember word for word. That's all he prayed. Sometimes that's all you should pray. I don't know how I got myself here. I don't know how I drifted so far away. I wasn't paying attention. I didn't have the warning signs. I don't know what I was thinking. I was pursuing the wrong things. And all of a sudden, look at me. I got danger coming my way. I'm in a mess. Help, Jesus. Help me. And in a time of desperation, Jehoshaphat cries out to God in prayer, and God immediately responds. God rescues us when we cry out to him because we're his kids. Even when we do stupid stuff, when we genuinely want to get back to him, he hears that prayer and he restores us back. Let's finish up this story. Verse 33. But a certain man, a Syrian soldier, drew his bow at random and struck the king of Israel between the scale armor and the breastplate. Therefore he said to the driver of his chariot, turn around and carry me out of the battle, for I'm wounded. And the battle continued that day, and the king of Israel was propped up in his chariot facing the Syrians until evening. Then at sunset he died. Ahab died. Micaiah was right. By the way, we never hear about Micaiah ever again in the Bible. We don't know if he got out of prison. Assuming he did, he was right. But a certain man drew his bow at random. I'm sure that soldier, Syrian soldier, thought it was just a random shooting in the air to go after the enemy. But it comes strategically placed in Ahab's body because there are no random arrows in the way God does things. I find it interesting that Ahab, as he's dying, is facing the Syrians. He's facing the carnage that he's created as he's fallen so far away from God. But Jehoshaphat is saved. A number of years ago, we were at home and our kids were very young, and I said something, and one of our daughters, Noelle, said to me, Dad, you said the P word. What's the P word? She goes, you said stupid. And I'm thinking, who's the stupid one here? And we didn't let our kids say the P word. You know, there's sometimes when you just have to say, I was so stupid. I love the Lord. I believe what's in this book. I know he's a good God. But I found myself, just joining in with people I shouldn't have joined in with, or trying to please people I really had no business in pleasing them. I got off track. I started listening to the press and the accolades of how good I was doing, and I started to think that maybe it was because of me. I turned stupid. We all We all turn stupid at times. It's called foolishness and sin. Sometimes we're not even aware. It's such a slow drift. And one day we wake up and we say, how did I get here? And so tonight, take a moment, take some time to just between you and God to acknowledge where you are in that potential drift. To be real about it. Maybe that passion that you had isn't there anymore. Maybe that sin that you've tried to hide so much is just creeping up all the more in your life. Maybe that relationship that's on the side that you shouldn't have at all, you've been nurturing. There's a God who wants to say to you, hey, cry out to me, and I'm going to save you and bring you right back. Tomorrow we're going to look very specifically on how to get back through the life of Jehoshaphat. But tonight I want to lead us in prayer and for each one of us to do some serious stock in our own life about where we are right now. Would you bow with me, please, in prayer? One of the great things about a week like this is you get to spend time with God for many days in a way that you don't back at home. And we could just live this week out and try to make it, a fun week, but God brings us to places like this to do serious work with Him. And so right now, spend some time with Him and have a frank conversation from your side, because He already knows where you are, about your realities. And don't hit yourself. Don't be all thinking that you're the only one in the world. Even a guy like Jehoshaphat lost his head, made some alliances that he shouldn't have, found himself in the middle of a battle he shouldn't have been in great danger, and cried out to God and said, God, help me get out of this. God hears that prayer, and He helps you get out of it. He rescues us, because that's the kind of God He is. Lord, rescue us from the places that we've been drifting to, and bring us back to seeking after You with all of our heart, to finding You to be that loving God that we can trust and that we will obey and be courageous for You. In Jesus' name.